Just ask you, Liam, any big plans for Christmas? Are you staying local?
Oh, yeah, I've got 4 little kids. The oldest is 10 and the youngest is 2.
Oh,
and I just started a new business a year ago. So we will be having a lovely staycation here in God's own country of Palmerston North.
I love it. And I love those, those ages. They just, it's special. It's a really special time.
And easy for you to say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, hard, but special. Great memories created, though. And Ali, what about you?
Oh, well, I'm still trying to convince my children, who are 22 and 24, that, Christmas doesn't have to be a list.
Yeah.
It can be a smaller present, maybe. Starting now.
I am so hearing you. We set this bar very high, I think, when they were younger.
Yeah, we do. No, I'm staying at home. Last year, I flew on Christmas Day with my daughter to New York to visit my sister.
Yeah.
Lived there for about a decade. And we got stuck in Chicago in a blizzard, and it was a nightmare. So I'm really looking forward to being at home this year.
Well, a very Merry Christmas to you both. Thank you for joining the panel today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Wallace Chapman will be back. Thank you for all of your texts. All the very best and a Merry Christmas.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. And haere ake nei, thousands of people protest over the government's policy agenda and what it means for race relations in Aotearoa. ACT says they're actually protesting against equal rights. Party leader David Seymour is live. Mega high tides at Rotorua's lakes means a multitude of hazards are out of sight, but should be front of mind. The local Maritime Officer joins us. The hangover lingers from Crate Day antics. We talked to a conservation group about the damage done to nesting birds. And attention lightweights, it could be time to pony up and get on the fast track. Don't forget, you can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. The ACT Party leader has attacked Te Pāti Māori following widespread protests today, saying the party lacks any serious solutions for the country's problems and is focusing on drama instead. Thousands of people gathered around the country, encouraged by the Māori Party to oppose the new government's policies on many Māori issues. Te Pāti Māori MPs also took an alternative oath to mokopuna and Te Tiriti o Waitangi during this morning's swearing-in ceremony at Parliament. David Seymour says the protests were disruptive and didn't give a clear message.
If they had a coherent message, that would be great. But they're trying to say that a government who stands for treating all people the same is racist. They're not just wrong, they are preaching the complete opposite of the words that they use.
Meanwhile, Te Pāti Māori co-leader Rawiri Waititi insists his MPs called King Charles by his name during Parliament's swearing-in ceremony. When some Te Pāti Māori MPs swore an oath to King Charles, they used the words Kingi Harihari instead of Kingi Tiare as per the script. Mr Waititi insists Harihari is another name for Charles.
Hare is another name for Charles. Hare is another name for Charles. I had an uncle whose daddy's name was Charlie. I don't know, you can find out whatever else it means.
There's lots of meanings for lots of things.
Harihari could also be translated as an insult, meaning offensive or objectionable, or as a skin rash. Legislation sets out the precise English and Te Reo Māori wording for the Oath of Allegiance. The discrepancy wasn't highlighted in Parliament, and the implications of not following the exact wording are unclear. Green Party MP Golritz Garaman says the government has been mimicking the Biden administration's language around Gaza and wants that to change. Hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Cenotaph near Parliament this afternoon, calling on Foreign Minister Winston Peters to demand a ceasefire, the release of all hostages and unimpeded humanitarian aid. Ms Garaman, who is the Greens Foreign Affairs spokesperson, will present the demands to Mr Peters. She says until now, the government government has been getting its lines from diplomats.
New Zealanders want our values reflected in foreign policy, and Winston Peters has always said he's an anti-establishment guy, so hopefully he can actually stand up to the diplomats.
Israel's military has ordered the evacuation of a fifth of the main city in southern Gaza as it expands its ground offensive against Hamas. An estimated 167,000 people need to leave the city of Khan Yunis. Witnesses also reported seeing tanks to the east, and a doctor said a local hospital was overwhelmed by casualties. The St John manager coordinating the ambulance response to the Christchurch terror attack says he and his colleagues were unprepared for the scale of the March 2019 massacre. St John Duty Centre manager Bruce Chubb was giving evidence for a second day at the inquest into the mosque shootings. Mr Chubb was unaware of several calls to St John detailing dozens of victims and initially told his superiors there were fewer than 10. He says it was impossible to track the deluge of information.
This is also quite a catastrophic event, which I can tell you right now I was never prepared for, didn't expect, and I don't believe my colleagues were either. So it was fundamentally overwhelming.
New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing says recent suspensions and an exodus overseas is creating a shortage of jockeys. At the end of their apprenticeship, jockeys are self-employed and some are finding the promise of bigger races overseas hard to turn down. Thoroughbred Racing's Amy Johnson says they're hoping to combat this. Apprentice jockeys in New Zealand earn an average of $100,000 at the end of their apprenticeship. You can hear more about this story shortly on Checkpoint. And severe thunderstorm warnings for Auckland and Northland have been dropped. Met Service issued the red warnings for the northern regions earlier this afternoon with predictions for thunderstorms, heavy rain and hail. A yellow thunderstorm watch is still in place for Northland until 7 o'clock this evening. In sport, Pakistan has won the second T20 Cricket International against the White Ferns in Dunedin by 10 runs. The victory means they take an unassailable 2-0 lead in the 3-match series. Batting first, Pakistan made 137 for 6, with spinners Amelia Kerr and Fran Jonas the most successful of the New Zealand bowlers, taking 2 wickets each. The White Ferns lost wickets early in the run chase, slumping to 29 for 4. Georgia Plimmer with a run a ball 28 and Hannah Rowe with 33 off 24 balls gave the New Zealand innings some impetus, but they ultimately fell short at 127 for 7. The Wellington Phoenix have lost defender Marissa Vandermeer for the rest of the A-League women's season after she suffered a serious knee ligament injury. Vandermeer, who's away with the Football Ferns in Colombia, suffered the injury while warming up for Sunday's game in Bogotá. She now faces up to a year on the sidelines. The injury blow comes just 4 weeks after midfielder Grace Wisniewski suffered a similar injury, also ruling her out for the season. And the Paris Deputy Mayor promises there will be no safer place in the world during next year's Olympics, following a knife and hammer attack in the city at the weekend. A German man died and 2 others were injured in the attack near the Eiffel Tower, which has been included in opening ceremony plans. That's the news.
Protesters take to the streets over the government's policy on Te Tiriti and Te Reo.
It's dispersing now, but at its peak I couldn't see the end of the crowd, and so there were like hundreds of people here.
This was about tangata whenua and tangata tiriti standing as one to ensure that we protect Tiriti o Waitangi, the very document that allows us to live here freely and under kotaitanga.
I've seen a couple cars zoom down the bus lanes and things like that, but they've sort of zoomed to nowhere. Essentially, they've had to jump back into the traffic.
Live from the streets to the halls of power, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Scattered showers, especially afternoons and evening. Possible thunderstorms and hail with localised downpours in Northland and Northern Auckland today. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, periods of rain. Heavy falls in Gisborne from this evening, easing tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Cloudy periods with occasional drizzle about the range ranges. Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Isolated showers mainly about the ranges. Rain spreading north tomorrow. Heavy falls possible in Fiordland and southern Westland. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Fine spells. Areas of morning and evening cloud. Isolated showers for inland Marlborough and Otago this afternoon. Scattered rain developing in Southland and Otago tomorrow afternoon. Then a few spots spreading to Canterbury. And looking at Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. Rain developing tomorrow afternoon. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Protest has coloured the opening day of Parliament this term, with activists gathering outside the halls of power and Te Pāti Māori MPs going off script inside. Today was a swearing-in ceremony for all MPs, but not all were happy with the oaths required to the monarch, King Charles. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
What a welcome for the class of 2023 as hundreds of protesters massed on Parliament's forecourt to greet MPs before their first day in the House.
What are we all here for?
It was Te Pāti Māori leading the charge and laying down a challenge, objecting to the new coalition's direction and its plans for Māori.
We will never be treated as second-rate citizens, ever!
The message going all the way to the top. The new Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, pleading for patience.
It's pretty unfair, to be honest. I think the reality is we're a government for a week. We are going to get going and get things done for Māori and for non-Māori, and that's what our focus is going to be.
First, though, the swearing in of MPs, with every person required to pledge allegiance to King Charles. It is a procedure required by law, necessary if MPs wish to sit in the House and cast their vote. Te Pāti Māori objects to the practice, believing it to be a colonial constraint, and so continued their activism inside the debating chamber. One by one, each of the party's 6 MPs stood and strayed off script, first declaring and signing an oath of their own.
I swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to our mokopuna, according to tikanga Māori.
I will perform my functions and duties and exercise my powers in accordance with Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
Toi tū Te Tiriti.
Toi tū Te Tiriti.
Each MP then proceeded forward to the Clerk of the House to do what was required of them. Close listeners, though, may have noticed that several referred to King Charles with the curious choice of te reo.
Kia kingi hare hare te tuatoru.
The word hare hare can also be translated as scab or skin rash. The consequence, if any, remains unclear.
Hare is another name for Charles. Hare hare is another name for Charles. I had an uncle whose daddy's name was Charlie.
Always provocative.
The provocative display won little favour from the 3 coalition partners, none particularly impressed.
They chose to do it their way.
The kapahaka theatrics are excessive.
I suspect that Te Pāti Māori's real problem is that lacking serious policy solutions, they're in the drama business.
The drama continued right up to the appointment of Parliament's new Speaker, with Te Pāti Māori trying to nominate Labour's Adrian Rotorua to carry on in the job.
Does the member accept the nomination?
No, he doesn't. Thank you.
Because the member won't accept the nomination, I can't accept it.
What a pity.
It left Nationals' Jerry Brownlee to assume the role uncontested.
My biggest challenge will probably be keeping myself in order.
My first experience of a speaker here had me kicked out several times. The last speaker had me suspended. I'm looking forward to seeing what you and I can achieve together.
If day one is anything to go by, the new Speaker will have his work cut out for him.
Hours before the swearing-in ceremony, thousands were on the streets protesting against the new government's policies on co-governance and the Treaty of Waitangi. At least 20 demonstrations were held across the country, Somya Bamedi Party reports.
Attendees at today's protest say the mood was positive and peaceful. As Tino Rangatira flags were waved and Waiata sung, people held signs showing support for Te Reo Māori and Te Tiriti. But underpinning today's demonstrations was a sense of frustration. Wellington protester Hohepa Thompson says he's taking a stand against the government's order for ministries to use their English names.
They're looking at our reo, they're trying to get that out of the government and all of these kind of proposed things. It's just like, it's taken a massive step backwards, and our tipuna have been fighting for the revitalisation of our reo, and this is only going to take us backwards.
The Wellington demonstration marched from Aurora Terrace in the central city to Parliament's lawn. Pākehā protester Dana Churcher says she thinks the coalition parties haven't taken the time to broaden their knowledge of Te Tiriti.
They probably have no idea what this half the stuff and why this is so important, but they're probably not going to because they don't feel like their eyes are open enough. They're not willing to have that growth. So I think they understand the English version. I don't think they understand the Te Reo Māori version.
13-year-old Jessica Andrews says she wants to stop the government from taking more steps in a similar direction.
I'm really worried that we might not even be able to speak te reo like how it has been in the past.
At a demonstration in New Plymouth, Ngā Reo Akariri says she's particularly concerned about the plan to review all legislation that includes Treaty of Waitangi principles.
The idea of having a referendum against the Treaty of Waitangi, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, e kau, e kore. We're still here. We're still here.
Others voiced their concern at the coalition government's promised changes to the health system, including axing the Māori Health Authority. At a protest in the Auckland suburb of Albany, activist Brendan Warne says he's worried about ACT's policy to reintroduce over-the-counter sales of a medicine used to make pee.
For them to put pseudoephedrine back on the shelf, that's just, you're going to hurt a lot of people, and I know what's going to happen. But today's about one kaupapa and that's about the treaty, so that's why we're here.
For 14-year-old Tūmanako Manihira from Kawakawa in Northland, today's protest was a more general stand for Māori rights.
I love fighting for te iwi Māori. I love my culture. I love who I am, where I'm from. I love my whānau. We started this kaupapa and we try to look for whatever helps us keep going on te aratika, the right path.
The police say traffic was disrupted in several areas, with hundreds of vehicles travelling in convoy throughout the North Island. 2 people were arrested on State Highway 1 in Auckland, a driver who failed to stop for police and a woman who behaved in a disorderly manner.
It is 14 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And joining us now is ACT Party Leader and Minister David Seymour. Tēnā koe e te minita.
Good afternoon, Lisa.
What's wrong with protesting?
There's nothing wrong with protesting. I recall leading protests myself when the previous government wanted to close down partnership schools. I led a group of a couple of hundred students up Queen Street to make the point that charter schools had done a lot of good for these often disadvantaged students and should be given a chance to continue, or at least have their results reviewed before they were shut down. But I just make the point that in that instance, we had a very specific and coherent point to make, and we did it in a way that, given Auckland Transport prevents everyone from driving up Queen Street anyhow, didn't actually go out of its way to disrupt other people going about their day-to-day life. I would argue that the events today did very little to make a coherent point, but they did ensure that people were maximally disrupted for the amount of protesting that went on.
Well, groundswell drove slowly on the motorway as well as part of a protest.
Well, once again, I don't think it's helpful to disrupt people if you're not making a coherent point, and it's not helpful to disrupt people more than you need to, because what you end up doing is actually driving away from the point you're trying to persuade people to.
It was a pretty coherent point, was it? There's concerns about push for a referendum around the Treaty of Waitangi and erosion of the recognition of tangata whenua. That was the point, wasn't it?
Well, not that I heard. I heard a grab bag of concerns that don't seem to be informed by looking at the government's program. And as for being concerned about having a discussion about the principles of the treaty, the lens through which we view the treaty in 2023 and beyond, I would have thought that someone interested in the treaty would view that as something positive that they wanted to be part of, whereas what you heard in your audio package before this interview was people who basically are protesting against dialogue, which I don't think is helpful whatsoever. This government believes that New Zealand has been increasingly divided by an obsession with identity politics and race fanaticism on the parts of some activists, where everything is viewed through the prism of race rather than humanity and human need. And we want to have constructive dialogue about how we return to the universal human rights that the likes of Kate Shepherd built this country on.
You have said today that they are protesting, those protesters were protesting against equal rights. They're actually protesting for equity. There is a difference. What's wrong with protesting for equity? Not everybody starts from the same position in life, do they?
Well, that's certainly true, but their view of how to achieve equity is to categorise people by ethnicity and treat everyone through an ethnic lens. That's what we object to, as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview. When I had almost no political capital, I put it all into innovative social policies in the form of charter schools that empowered communities, no matter what their ethnic background was. Some had an ethnic base, some didn't.
Sometimes need is based on ethnic background, though, isn't it, Minister? Sometimes need is based on ethnic background. Look at the health statistics and how poorly Māori are represented in those statistics, in life expectancy statistics, and lung cancer statistics, and diabetes statistics. So need and equity marry up there, don't they, Minister?
Well, with respect, you're begging the question, which means to put the answer to your question in the question you ask. If you start from the lens of ethnicity, and then you find that, of course, it would be statistically extraordinary if every group was completely identical when, for example, you have different age profiles, you have different housing position, you have different locations in the country. Of course, there's going to be differences between the ethnic groups.
And some of that is based on access to resources, isn't it, Minister, from day dot? And some resources have not been equitably handed out because people are discriminated against at times.
Well, you know, I know, Lisa, what you're saying is not quite as insightful as you seem to think. I agree with you that there's inequities, but I've just listed a series of reasons why people are unequal. And funnily enough, there are some Māori people who are doing very well, thank you very much, and don't appreciate being treated as needy. There are some needy people who, frankly, are not Māori, are not Pacific, and are going to miss out if you use race as your prism for viewing inequity. That's the point we're making.
In the simplest way possible, can you tell me in one sentence what you are trying to achieve with your policy agenda as it relates to the treaty? What is the outcome which you would see as a gain or a positive? In a sentence, what is it?
We are going to restore the true intent of the treaty to establish a society where everybody has ngā tikanga katoa rite tahi, or the same rights and duties, because universal human rights, treating ourselves primarily as human before any other characteristic, is one of the most important things that a country can achieve. And what's more, it can be found in the treaty. So it's one long sentence, but I think you'll find it's grammatically one sentence.
So hasn't decades of case law and political consensus over the last 30 to 40 years already established that, Minister?
You're right that there's been a lot of case law interpreting what Parliament said in the past, but Parliament has never said what the principles of the treaty should be. It said that there should be principles, it forgot to define them. Our proposal is that Parliament should define them, and the fact that courts have previously interpreted laws doesn't mean that Parliament shouldn't speak again about its intentions. That's actually exactly how our political system works. Parliament makes laws, the courts interpret them. Sometimes Parliament decides that after the last 30 or 40 years we've become increasingly divided, I might add without achieving much in the sense of true material equity
Okay.
between different groups, and it's time to have another go at it.
Sorry to rush you, there's a lot to get through. Just a couple of other things I would like answers for. Will you be at Waitangi next year?
I certainly intend to be. I've been, notwithstanding COVID, I think every year that I've been an MP.
And have you met with your whānau hapu iwi to discuss the direction you want to go in around your treaty policies?
Yeah, absolutely.
And are your views aligned?
Well, there's obviously in any family there's going to be a range of different views, but if you're telling me that in order to be Māori I have to behave in a certain way or meet
No,
with
I'm just
certain
asking
people
you
in
if you've had a
certain format.
discussion. I'm just asking you if you've had a discussion with your iwi and your hapu about your policy direction.
Well, I've certainly spoken with whānau, and I think, frankly, that the way that you frame it up, that somehow a person's views are only valid if they've come to them in a certain formula, is exactly the kind of prejudice and bigotry that I thought we were supposed to be against here.
Appreciate your time, Minister. That is the ACT Party leader and Minister David Seymour. 22 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening, whether it's the protests, policy of the new government, whether you're for it or against it and why. Text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, and the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time to go to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
ACT Party leader David Seymour has accused Te Pāti Māori of having a grab bag of concerns that don't reflect the government's program. He was speaking after the Māori Party encouraged at least 20 demonstrations across the country against the new coalition's policies on several Māori issues, and its 6 MPs went off script during today's swearing-in at Parliament. The organisation, representing 17 medical colleges, says it's concerned about aspects of the coalition's health policy, including repealing legislation aiming to curb smoking. The New Zealand Council of Medical Colleges is also concerned about the proposed abolition of Te Akawhai Order, the Māori Health Authority. And the Auditor-General has launched an investigation after more than 24 voting places made data entry errors when confirming the final election result. The Electoral Commission says while they had no effect on the outcome, they should have been spotted sooner. In other news, the St John manager coordinating ambulances during the 2019 Christchurch terror attacks has told the inquest for the 51 victims that it was impossible to track the amount of information coming in. Bruce Chubb says he and his colleagues were unprepared for the scale of the emergency. And Met Service has dropped its severe thunderstorm warnings for the Auckland and Northland regions. The warnings for thunderstorms, heavy rain and hail were to have been in place until 7 o'clock. Those are the headlines. In fact, I hate to tell you this, but I was so enthralled with that discussion with David Seymour that I forgot to get the traffic news. It's the first time it's ever happened, and I promise it will be the last.
OK, you are forgiven. Ngā mihi, Evie. The White Ferns' home summer is off to a disastrous start. An unexpected series defeat to Pakistan was sealed with a 10-run loss in this afternoon's T20 in Dunedin. The White Ferns had never lost to the visitors in the shortest format of the game before falling short in the series opener over the weekend. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. What happened?
Well, today was actually going to be a celebration for the White Ferns. Before a ball was even bowled, it was going to be recognition for Susie Bates, long-time White Fern. It was her home ground. They'd renamed University Oval Susie Bates Oval. It was going to be a big celebration. Not what it turned out to be at all. They won't be in a joyous mood coming into this one. After sending Pakistan into bat, they got 137 for 6 off their 20 overs. New Zealand bowlers Molly Penfold, pace bowler, she got 2 for 17 off her 3 overs, and Fran Jonas got 2 for 21 off her 4 overs. But as soon as New Zealand came out to bat, it fell apart really quickly. In reply, they lost their first wicket on the 3rd ball of the innings. Their second wicket fell in the 3rd over, and by 3 overs later, they were 3 down for 28. So you might notice a bit of a pattern here. It was the top order falling over was really leaving a lot for the lower order batsmen to do. And there's the less experienced or people that we maybe haven't seen as much come from. So it was number 7 batter, Hannah Rowe, who was the standout. She got 33 before she was out in the final over. She couldn't get us across the line there. It was still 10 more runs needed in that game to basically level up the series. After that first loss on Sunday, it was a hefty defeat. It was a 7-wicket loss. They've now followed that by a 10-run loss. So that's not a great start to the summer. They do have to face Pakistan in the final T20 on Saturday, and then they go into a 3-match ODI series where hopefully they'll be turning it around.
And on the rugby front, another top referee is stepping away from the game. Why is this?
Yeah, England referee Tom Foley is stepping away from international rugby refereeing. He was the TMO in the Rugby World Cup final. And after that, there was a lot of scrutiny and criticism of his performance. He, in fact, calls it a torrent of criticism and abuse online. So that is a lot behind his reason to step away. He's been doing this for 13 years. He says that death threats, and he also had to warn his children's school after that final game because of the way that he was being treated and the things that were coming at him. And so he's going to continue to do, he's not lost to refereeing altogether, he'll continue to do domestic premiership rugby refereeing in England. But you'll sort of realise this comes after the Rugby World Cup final referee Wayne Barnes retired from refereeing. He had a similar experience there with the online abuse and threats for his family. And England Rugby's Owen Farrell, he was also taking a 6-month break. He'll miss the Six Nations. He's stepping away for mental health reasons as well. So after Foley's decision, Rugby Football Union boss Bill Sweeney said the abuse Tom has suffered since the Rugby World Cup final, along with other officials involved in that game, is totally unacceptable. No one should be treated in this way, doing their job for the sport they are so committed to and passionate about. So the Rugby Football Union is saying that they're doing everything they can to guard against this kind of abuse for these officials involved in it. But it's just another, as you sort of see from that last game of the Rugby World Cup, it's had quite the fallout.
Thank you, Felicity. That's our sports reporter, Felicity Reid. Boaties are being warned to beware treacherous booby traps hidden below exceptionally high lake levels in the Rotorua region. A number of lakes in the area have water at levels that haven't been seen since the 1970s. And in some cases, that means whole boat ramps and picnic tables are submerged. Add to that a flood of summer visitors, and it is a recipe for extreme caution. The Bay of Plenty Regional Council Senior Maritime Officer, Rolly Bagshaw, describes how the lakes are looking.
Well, we've had a lot of rain, obviously, the last 12, 15 months, and some of the lakes are very, very high, haven't had the ability to recover. Obviously having good outlets, they've stayed high. That is mostly Aotearoa, Rotorua and Aotearoa have been the ones that have been slow to recover, and we were expecting them to be high over the summer period.
How high's high, Rolly?
Well, we're probably, 3 to 4 metres up in the case of Lake Rotorua. So that obviously means that a lot of structure that people would ordinarily be used to seeing, such as barbecues, playgrounds, jetty structures and boat ramps, are currently underwater.
So completely swamped?
Completely underwater, yeah, in those cases. Other lakes, such as Tikitapu Blue Lake, are significantly high, so beaches that people may have been enjoying last summer are underwater, so there'll be grassy verges and not so much beach.
And are you seeing them recede just very slowly or not at all?
Very slowly, yeah. It's anticipated that it's going to take some time, possibly longer than summer, till we get anything close back to normal levels.
Okay, so what risks does that create when you can't see the boat ramp, the toilet block, the barbecue or the picnic table?
Sure, yeah. I mean, look, we've got a number of boaties that traditionally love to come to those areas. The lakes is a very popular place over summer, so, we're urging people to, understand that the lakes are very high, understand where there was ramps, there may be no longer ramps. Lakes Council, along with Regional Council, are putting out a number of maps in those areas, signalling where some of those potential navigation hazards may be. It's really educating the public and understanding that it is a different environment this summer than maybe what they've been previously used to.
So are you marking some of those potential booby traps with buoys?
Absolutely, yeah. Where we can, we've been trying to mark them, but some of them are well and truly underwater. So where they are underwater that far, they don't actually represent a problem. But we've got associated problems such as, we've had some lake erosion, which has dropped trees and so forth in, and maybe some of the wood structure that was on the bottom, stuck to the bottom, some of that's releasing. So we can see debris in the middle of the lakes at any given time. So one of the safety messages is actually cautioning boaties and skippers particularly, because they're the ones responsible, is to keep a lookout, keep a really good lookout.
Have you lowered the speed limit at all?
No, we do have provisions, and we've got 5 knot areas which are sufficient at this moment, and that means obviously boats can't go more than 5 knots within 200 metres of the shoreline, and in some cases, given the high lake levels, that some of those areas have provided their own buffer because the 5 knot buoys haven't shifted, if that makes sense.
Yeah, do you still want people coming over the summer to use those lakes, given the potential hazards?
Oh, look, what we're saying is they can still come and use these spaces. There are, if you've got, if you're a new boatie, there are better lakes to use, such as the Lake Rotorua and Aotearoa. They've had good outlets. They've maintained fairly normal levels, and so they're the safer options this summer.
And what kind of influx do you expect normally over the summer?
Well, look, I mean, last summer was a little bit of a washout for us, obviously with the amount of rain we had. This summer we would expecting to be busy with the El Niño, and there's obviously talk of a good summer, and we would expect Rotorua and also Tarawera to be busy, Blue Lake and also Aotearoa. So we've put a bit of effort into those lakes, making sure signage is good and our nav aids are all in position, ready for the summer influx.
And that is Rolly Bagshaw. And for more information about navigating the lakes and the biosecurity situation, you can visit the Bay of Plenty Regional Council's Boating in the Bay website. It is 27 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa I nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me in the studio. Bad debt, Nona, you tell me, is costing the economy more than $2 billion a year. What's the reason?
Yeah, this debt management firm called Debt Managers. She looks at me like, are you sure? Yes, no, really, Debt Managers. They're an organization that buys debt from businesses that are owed money from consumers. So they basically are debt collectors, but they do it in a different way. What they try and do is work with the debtor to come up with a plan to pay off their debt. And they have quite a good success rate. They reckon 5% of the debts that they buy have to be written off, but the rest are somehow paid back over time. You know, they might freeze the interest rates, they might waive fees, they'll do different kinds of things to get some kind of resolution for the consumer. They reckon that's a better outcome for them. It's better in terms of, social, cultural. It encourages financial literacy and so on. However, they're saying there's no rules in terms of debt collection in New Zealand, which is different than we see in many other developed countries where there are regulations in place. There are licensing, minimum standards of conduct and so on, which don't exist here. And the principal of the company, Charles Whiting, he says that really that's a problem because with private and public sector, they're covered by all kinds of regulations, like the triple CFA, which is the Credit Contracts and Consumers Finance Act, which requires them not to lend money to people who can't afford it. But the government is exempt from that. The government, if you owe money to the government can seize your wages, do whatever, with no regard whatsoever to your living arrangements. And he said that the rules should be consistent for everybody, the government included.
Financial advisors want to improve access to home loans. What change are they asking for?
Okay, so I just mentioned the triple CFA. So that's the Credit Contracts and Consumer Finance Act. That's quite a controversial piece of legislation that was put in place a couple of years ago. It was tweaked a little bit to make it easier because there was this situation where people were turning up to get a loan, and because they bought too many avocados or they bought their coffee, they weren't allowed to because they were like frivolous with their money or something. Well, there were some tweaks made to make that better, but not good enough, according to the Financial Advice New Zealand. They want to see more comprehensive changes made so that it makes it easier for especially young people to be able to borrow money to buy a home. At the moment, it's still too difficult to get across that hurdle, making it difficult for people to achieve home loans and so forth. So that's a big part of what's going on in the economy. Debt and so on. These are things that really the people in the background are really wanting to see a tightening up there.
Tell us about the markets today, please, Nona.
Well, we ended down 11 points. So that's hardly anything, right? 11,357. The dollar is trading at 61.5 US cents, 93.5 Australian cents, 48.6 British pence. We did hear from the Reserve Bank of Australia this afternoon, but they're holding their cash rate steady at 4.35%. That caused the Australian dollar to fall about 0.5%, and that took the Kiwi down a little bit as well. But, tomorrow's another day.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier with business there. Crate day antics and four-wheel drives have destroyed the eggs of endangered birds nesting along a Canterbury river. There's several colonies of the Aotearoa, the black-fronted tern and banded dotterel nests along the Ashley Rakahuri River. But despite signage warning people away from the birds, last Saturday dozens of four-wheel drivers ripped up and down the river, sending rocks flying into nests and precious birds scattering. The Ashley Rakahuri River Care Group have been monitoring the damage done on Crate Day for several years, and its spokesperson Grant Davey joins us now. Hi, Grant.
Hello, you summed that up very well.
Yeah, tell me about the extent of the damage. What have you been able to tell after the event?
Yeah, well, this year there was about 150 four-wheel drives going along the river. The River Care Group, we're trying to look after a couple of those colonies, and we had a couple of protesters there who managed to keep the vehicles away from one of the worst places where there's lots of little chicks running around, but they went within a few metres of nests and very small chicks. And in the other colony, the vehicles sort of badly affected 4 nests, which doesn't immediately sound a lot, but the eggs in 2 nests were broken. An egg was thrown out of a nest with the four-wheel drive actually driving over the nest in another location, and four-wheel drives just straddled a little chick. Must have been very terrified right at the nest.
So how precious are these birds, and when you talk about some eggs being damaged, what does that mean to the overall population?
So the black-fronted tern is the most endangered bird we have along the riverbed here, and they only nest in braided rivers in the eastern and southern South Island. And they're classified as nationally endangered, which is the second highest category of endangerment. And basically they're on the path towards extinction. So what actually happened by itself is not massive, but it's just another nail in the coffin of these birds. We have massive problems with predators, particularly the Norway rat. And those problems are just absolutely terrible to try and address. But we should be able to keep people in their dozens to hundreds driving through their nesting colonies, but it's turning out to be not very easy at all.
Yeah, so what was the attitude of the drivers? Because there were a few protesters down there, activists, trying to get the message out. There were signs down at the river. So what was the attitude of the drivers?
Yeah, DOC and police were stopping quite a few of the vehicles coming in and explaining the problems that they might cause, but they just kept going. We had a couple of protesters there who were fairly bravely stopping these vehicles and talking to them and trying to get them to go around the northern part of this particular colony. It was all, I think, quite friendly, but they just not taking any notice. They think they have a right to get out in the river and drive around. So we're not talking about organised clubs of four-wheel drivers here. We're talking about people who were organised on Facebook.
Yeah, so I understand that some of their licence plates were covered up as well. So what does that say to you?
Yeah, so some of the vehicles, I think, probably weren't registered, didn't have number plates in the first place. I think some of the licence plates had been taken off, and I noticed one where the licence plate had been taped over. So these people are very aware that they shouldn't be there, and they know that if they're photographed with a number plate, they can be tracked down. So they understand what's going on, and they choose to ignore the problems.
I've seen some of the footage and we've been playing some of it while you've been talking to us, and they are ripping through there at a bit of a rate, and there's lots of them, and it's not a new thing. It's been going on for a while. So what can be done to stop it happening again next year?
Yeah, probably the most obvious thing, something that I think DOC is promoting, is that don't do it when the birds are nesting. And at the moment, it's the very worst time. In December, the birds have got chicks, a lot of them. There's still a lot of nests there. Some of these species, well, probably all of them, if they lose nests early in the season, they can nest again. But I think if birds at this time of the year nest again, they're not likely to be successful. So another thing is perhaps putting fences around the nesting colonies, which some people are suggesting. There's got to be more education, and the laws need to be tightened up so DOC can do meaningful enforcement. At the moment, it's just too difficult.
On that note, Grant, is it just a free-for-all? I mean, can anyone go down there and drive their vehicle and that's perfectly legal? Yeah,
well, we basically look after the eastern 20-odd kilometres of the river, and working with ECAN, we've managed to reduce the problem a lot by putting blocks in access points and putting signs up and a lot of education and publicity. But further up, that's not the case, and anyone can get out there and drive along the riverbed.
So does it just need to be a complete ban on cars on the riverbed?
That is really in a very difficult basket, doing that. It's something that I'd like to see, but there needs to be a ban during the nesting season anyway.
Understand. Hey, thank you so much for your time. That is Grant Davey, who's from the Ashley Rakahuri River Care Group. They're concerned, every crate day, a bunch of people get down there in their four-wheel drives and rip along the river, and the birds are suffering as a consequence. It is 17 minutes away from 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaro, do send us your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme tonight. A lot of you getting in touch about our conversation with Minister David Seymour. We'll get to some of that a little later. But you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now. Anea Evie, mina pita kōrero.
Te Pāti Māori co-leader Rawiri Waititi insists his MPs did call King Charles by his name during today's swearing-in ceremony at Parliament. The party's 6 MPs referred to King Charles with the words Kingi Harihari instead of the scripted Kingi Tiari. Mr Waititi says Harihari is another name for Charles, and he has the backing of senior New Zealand First MP Shane Jones. Mr Jones says while Harihari can also mean something objectionable, he thinks the Māori Party addressed the guts of the oath. The lawyer for the engineer whose firm designed the CTV building that collapsed in the 2011 Christchurch earthquake, killing 115 people, says the complaint has no basis and should be dismissed. An Engineering New Zealand disciplinary hearing is looking at whether Dr Alan Ray failed to adequately supervise an employee, David Harding, who designed the building in 1986. Wellington Water says it will be repairing a leak at the site of a sinkhole in the city centre this evening. A damaged pipe on Manners Street has been clamped and covered over. In Thailand, 14 people have died after a bus lost control and crashed into a tree in the western province of Prachuap-Khiri-Khan. More than 20 passengers are in hospital. And a Californian man has been jailed for 6 months after deliberately crashing his plane to boost viewership for his YouTube channel. Trevor Jacob filmed himself pretending to crash, ejecting from an aircraft, and lied to investigators about what he'd done. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, nothing to report on the main routes of our main centres. One texter has advised us that heavy rain in Silverdale, north of Auckland City, is causing flooding in the usual places, they say. Take care driving to those conditions. Our next news and weather are at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā, Eho. If you have a love of horses, a need for speed and weigh under 55 kilos, a job as a jockey could be just for you. Recent suspensions and an exodus of local jockeys to greener pastures overseas means there's a real shortage of jockeys at the moment. Now, efforts are being ramped up to invest in apprentice jockeys here, with hopes they'll stick around to race on home turf. Reporter Louise Tenuth and camera operator Nick Monroe went to find out what it takes to be a jockey.
It's another early morning training session for 19-year-old apprentice jockey Ace Lawson-Carroll at Sean and Emma Clotworthy's stables in Pukekohe. Here he's practising on a replica horse.
You're up at 6 o'clock, saddling your horses, and then you're out riding them, do about 8 or 9 a day, and then you head on home, have a shower, grab something to eat, and then you're back on the road again, go to racetrack. You got races, or you obviously got trials and stuff like that. Just constantly doing things.
Originally from Whakatane and going to school in Papakura, Ace had ridden horses bareback before, but never like this. Then 4 years ago, he met trainer Sean Clotworthy, and the rest is history.
Sean sort of swooped me off my feet and we ended up here and haven't looked back since.
150 to go. Sea Jets and Ace Lawson-Carroll break away now by 2, by 3.
While he's only in his second year of his apprenticeship and the first in his family to pursue this career, Ace has won 36 races already. He puts that down to a natural connection with the animal.
Horses, yeah. I sort of go in my own little world when I'm on top of them and just block everything out a wee bit, yeah.
On top of that, there are some specific restrictions jockeys need to meet, weighing under 55 kgs. For jockeys like Ace, who's 147 centimetres, it's easier to remain below that weight. Trainer Sean Clotworthy says for taller athletes, the weight restriction can take a toll.
Those guys that struggle with weight, they've got to really dedicate themselves to it, and that's a pretty regimental type of dieting system they've got.
163.6. Today we're at an athlete development day in Cambridge, which apprentice jockeys attend every 6 weeks. The program involves everything from intense fitness training, nutrition and financial workshops. Once jockeys have completed their 4-year apprenticeship, they become self-employed, booking races themselves or through an agent. Sean Clotworthy says the promise of bigger races and money overseas is hard to turn down for some athletes.
But it is difficult to get them staying in New Zealand if they've got opportunities over there.
Ace confesses he's hoping to head across the ditch eventually.
So I've got my eyes set on going over to Australia, competing against those good jockeys and try and make a name of myself over there.
Head of Education, Training and Recruitment at New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing, Amy Johnson, says this is an issue they're hoping to tackle. The organisation is hoping to take inspiration from training regimes that take place in the Australian state of Victoria, where apprentice jockeys do twice as much off-job training.
They do up to 120 hours of off-job training, so these type of athlete development days, and that's something we will look to employ in the near future.
But she says there are many financial perks to the apprenticeships here.
It's the only apprenticeship you actually come out with money in New Zealand. So the employer pays you your wages, you get a weekly wage, and any money that's earned via stakes money from winning races or placing or riding fees goes into a trust account that's held by NZTR. That earns interest over the duration of the apprenticeship, and we have average apprentices coming out with over $100,000.
Controlling a 500 kg animal is no easy feat, and everything from reaction time, speed, endurance and strength are tested.
And then we're going to do, up here as well, we're going to do our wall sit.
But the 20 or so apprentices at today's development day say it's just as important to be strong mentally to have what it takes.
It's a very mentally challenging game, but very rewarding at the same time. So no, as long as you've got a passion and a good work ethic.
I've come a long way, so I can't lay back, and I have to give it 100%.
It can be quite up and down. Like at the moment, I'm obviously injured and on the sidelines, which is one of the downs of it. But riding winners is always good and keeps you getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, 6 days a week.
Quite the commitment to be one of New Zealand's top jockeys.
10 minutes away from 6. If you were listening to that on radio, do check out the video version of that story. It's got some beautiful pictures in it. And stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A severe thunderstorm warning has been issued for Northland, which is getting hit by heavy rain and could have some flooding. It's getting about 40 mils of rain an hour in some areas, and there's a rain watch in place for Northland and Auckland until 7 p.m. tonight. Well, joining us now is Met Service duty forecaster Heath Gullery. Hi, Heath. Is summer coming anytime soon, please?
Kia ora. Yes, well, we've got some finders coming up for the Upper North Island later this week, but we had to get rid of tonight's weather first. So still got a few hours of heavy rain and possible thunderstorms across Northland and northern parts of Auckland. And as you mentioned, we've got that severe thunderstorm watch valid until 7 p.m. this evening.
So when you say north of Auckland, where is it tracking? Where are the next areas it's expected to hit?
Yeah, so some heavy rain coming across the Kaipara and Wellsford areas for the next hour or so, next hour and a half. With some rain further south across Auckland City, but that heavier rain is expected up north near Kaipara.
And does it just peter out, or does someone else get it after us?
Yeah, well, it's just an easing trend in general for the rain across the Upper North Island tonight, and tomorrow it's just more kind of garden variety cloudy periods and the odd shower pushing through Auckland and Northland.
So Heath, what's causing this sort of up and downsy weather right now?
Yeah, we've got a low sitting out just north of the country. It's bringing in rain across the top half of the North Island. And it's worth noting as well, we are expecting some heavy rain across Gisborne tonight and tomorrow morning, where a heavy rain watch is in place.
Are you aware of any flooding right now, Heath?
We haven't seen any reports of flooding, but there has been some weather stations picking up between 20 and 30 millimetres per hour in localised places across Northland. So I would think there would be some surface flooding across Northland today.
So off the top of your head, Heath, do you know which stations those are that are picking up those heavy rain?
Yeah, Kaitai's had it 19 millimetres in an hour earlier this afternoon, and a couple of the regional council stations have had between 20 and 30 millimetres per hour.
Really appreciate your time, Heath. Thank you for joining us. That is Heath Gullery, who is the Met Service duty forecaster there. That warning is in place. It's a rain watch, in place for Northland and Auckland, and it lasts until 7 p.m. tonight. For 10 years, Granny's Christmas Grotto in the Rangitikei town of Martin has brought the joy of Christmas to thousands of visitors. But after it closes its doors this year, everything will be auctioned off as the woman behind it all retires because of ill health. Our reporter Jimmy Ellingham takes a peek inside.
Oh, the weather outside is frightful. Hi, welcome to Granny's Christmas Grotto. We always start with our large nativity at the front here. This nativity set's from the Philippines, made in 1993, so it's fairly old, and the hands and face are made of polyresin, and you'll see that the clothing is made out of paper mache.
The welcome to the grotto is impressive, but it's just the beginning of a magical tour through the almost 4,000 square metre building that houses Jenny Greener's Christmas collection.
We've got tables set for when Nana and Grandad come round, high tea for them. All this lovely food on here. One of my ladies makes this, and it's made with what the children use, like Play-Doh and
Play-Doh, is it?
Play-Doh, yes, Play-Doh, that's that sort of thing.
It looks nice, and we've got Kit Kats there, little biscuits, even a shot, I think.
Yes, jelly shots, yes, yep.
Mrs. Greener has always loved Christmas and started buying decorations, trees and figures up large 32 years ago, putting them on public display from 2013. There's a small charge to get in, but the money goes to keeping the place running, which doesn't come cheap. For a start, there are the 500 batteries needed every year.
If you're from the radio, we'll see how good a dancer you are. Can you do the gingerbread shuffle?
No.
Come on! It's not really a twerk. He's pretty groovy though. And here's our Kiwiana room. So we've got Christmas at the beach. Really groovy surfing Santa there. Santa down here windsurfing. Our version of a Pahudakawa tree. The most photographed tree in the building.
It's not what you'd think either. A tree decorated with old 440ml Tui beer cans. The grotto really has everything Christmas, from traditional snow village scenes to trees decorated to modern tastes.
Yeah, it's a little bit sad really to think that it's going to go. It would be nice if somebody had the money to come along and buy the entire collection and continue it somewhere else. But actually I'm also okay with the fact that a little bit of the grotto will live on everywhere.
It's too early to say when the auction will take place, and Mrs. Greener knows it will be an emotional time.
I've made the decision because my health isn't good, and I just think that it's the right and responsible thing to do for me to deal with this, rather than to leave it to my husband and children to deal with. None of them are particularly Christmas orientated, so yeah. Husband, 3 sons, and all bordering on Grinches. Love them all to bits, but yeah.
Mrs. Greener has a brain tumour, and while a 71-year-old isn't going anywhere soon, not running the grotto will mean her family can have her back in December.
I'll probably just sit around and cry and feel sorry for myself. No, I will do things. I will go and visit other people's Christmas displays. I'll be able to do the things that I can't do normally in December.
Home will largely be a Christmas-free zone, apart from some seasonal figurines by artist Jim Shaw, which are displayed throughout the grotto.
A lot of gold and cream Santas in this room. Several that play instruments. This one's a particularly lovely one. When you're doing a tour, you can actually often walk in this room and you'll see people tapping their eyes. For some reason, the instrumental version of this often evokes emotion in people.
As will Granny's Grotto, closing its doors for good on December the 23rd. Until then, Mrs. Greener and her volunteer helpers will usher another couple of thousand people through their winter wonderland.
When we finally kiss goodnight.
And that was Jimmy Allingham reporting there. Again, if you're listening on radio, check out the web page because there's some fantastic photos. I think he left the side down without any gingerbread dance. I'm not quite sure what that is. Someone could inform me, 2101 on text, but I vote to see Jimmy Allingham do that. A lot of feedback on our interview with Minister David Seymour, also leader of the ACT Party, regarding the protests today. This listener says thousands protested, millions did not. What can we take from that? This listener says David Seymour is right in his statement about the protest today, but only if it's a level playing field for all, and for Māori it clearly is not, says Ken. Craig says Seymour is a funny old stick, isn't he? Groundswell wasn't coherent either, including talking about hanging the Prime Minister, doing away with the treaty, speaking English instead of Māori, and of course something to do with farming ute taxes. But somehow farmers holding up traffic all around the country is okay, Māori isn't, says Craig. Another says Indigenous rights are human rights. The government has no right to establish the principles of treaty. Unbelievable arrogance and ignorance. This one says, imagine if tikanga was totally ignored on the marae. Perhaps that is okay nowadays. Perhaps anything goes. Most people who identify as Māori didn't vote for Te Pāti Māori, this listener says. So why do they get so much oxygen? Yes, and Māori are at the wrong end of all the stats the minister just rattled off, a listener points out. If David Seymour is so concerned about human rights, then he will want to keep fair pay arrangements and laws in place, surely, says Kathy from Waiheke. Te tiriti is a contract, another listener says. You cannot renegotiate a contract with only one side at the table. It is unimaginable that outcomes for Māori are worse than the rest of the population. Treating Māori the same as everyone else supposedly has only made it worse, this listener says. The ACT policy can only be explained as deeply racist, a deeply racist view that it's Māoridim's own fault. He should resign before the riots start, that listener says. On Crate Day, a lot of you think the law needs to change so that for selfish dickheads and buffoons who only think about themselves.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Paul Mardier, good evening. I'm Evie Ashton. The ACT Party leader has dismissed today's widespread anti-government protests as disrupting lots of people for no point. Thousands of demonstrators gathered around the country in response to a call from Te Pāti Māori to oppose coalition policies like axing the Māori Health Authority and reviewing the treaty principles. ACT's leader and Government Minister David Seymour told Checkpoint the protesters have it wrong.
We are going to restore the true intent of the treaty to establish a society where everybody has ngā tikanga katoa rite tahi, or the same rights and duties, because universal human rights, treating ourselves primarily as human before any other characteristic, is one of the most important things that a country can achieve.
Meanwhile, hundreds of people have gathered singing waiata at Christchurch's Bridge of Remembrance tonight as part of the national protest. Many are carrying tino rangatiratanga flags and signs with slogans such as Ka whawhai tonu mātou, we will fight on. The crowd is being led by the organisers in a series of waiata while they wait for the opening karakia to begin. The widow of one of the Christchurch terror attack shahid or martyrs has recalled terrifying details of the day of the attack. Saira Patel, whose husband Musa was murdered at Linwood Islamic Centre on March the 15th, has this afternoon given evidence at the inquest into the 2019 mosque shootings. She says she called for help after her husband was shot, but it took a long time for the police to enter the mosque.
I saw a man with a khaki grey vest wearing a blue bandana over his face and holding a gun. I did not know he was police. I shouted, "Please don't shoot," as did the other person who was sitting in front of me. He pulled down the bandana and told that he was police. I then saw other police in police uniforms, but I still was so scared.
Saira Patel was asked to leave the mosque and wasn't with her husband when he died. The US State Department says it's too early to say whether Israel is heeding US advice to protect civilians in its renewed offensive in Gaza, but it does say Israel is making more targeted requests for civilian evacuations in southern Gaza. The BBC's Gaza correspondent, Rushdie Abu-Alouf, has the latest.
Very intense Israeli airstrikes around Khan Yunis tonight, with reports of Israeli tanks are moving from the eastern part and the northern part of Khan Yunis. It was a very long day of bombing, not only in the southern part of Khan Yunis, but also in Gaza City, where we are getting report about 2 UN schools have been hit by Israeli airstrikes. About 30 people were killed and over 100 injured.
Rushdie Abu-Alouf says with communications down, people are unable to contact emergency services. Meanwhile, the Labour Party is calling on the government to issue visas to New Zealanders' families stuck in Gaza. The party's immigration spokesperson, Phil Twyford, says the government should put families' names on the list at the Rafah border crossing and follow Australia's example and provide visas so family members can take shelter with family here. Mr Twyford says the New Zealand Embassy in Cairo told a New Zealander she couldn't add her family to the New Zealand list without a directive from the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Yesterday, Winston Peters said 5 New Zealand permanent residents had escaped through the Rafah crossing overnight. Last month, at least 11 New Zealanders and 3 permanent residents made it out of Gaza.
There was no professional standard in place.
The lawyer for the engineer whose firm designed the CTV building that collapsed in the Christchurch earthquake says the complaint against Alan Ray has no basis and should be dismissed. 115 people died when the 6-storey building came down in February 2011. An Engineering New Zealand disciplinary hearing is looking at whether Dr Ray failed to adequately supervise an employee, David Harding, who designed the building in 1980. Dr Ray's lawyer, Christy McDonald KC, says he strongly denies the allegation.
There was no professional standard in place in 1986 that required Dr Ray to closely supervise an employee who was a senior registered engineer such as Mr Harding.
Christy McDonald says Dr Ray recognises the families of the victims killed in the CTV building and the loss they have suffered. The Auditor-General has launched an investigation after more than 24 voting places made errors when confirming the final election result. The Electoral Commission discovered 25 voting places had made the data entry errors. John Ryan says while these had no effect on the outcome of the final election results, the Commission had expected the mistakes to have been picked up sooner. He says he's launching a review into the quality assurance procedures in place for the vote count in the general election. Mr Ryan says his review will look into why the errors occurred, what the Commission did once it learned of them, and what improvements can be made. The investigation is due to be completed by April next year. And lake levels around Rotorua are expected to stay high this summer. Water levels are at their highest ever since the 1970s, with no sign of them falling soon. Bay of Plenty Regional Council's Rolly Bagshaw has told Checkpoint lakes Okataina, Rotoma and Rotoehu are the most affected. He's warning boaties that flooded picnic tables, barbecues and playgrounds could be sticking out of the water for the next few months.
It's really educating the public and understanding that it is a different environment this summer than maybe what they've been previously used to.
Rolly Bagshaw says water levels are receding very slowly, but doesn't expect them to return to normal until after summer. That's the news.
Tomorrow after 1pm, sometimes it feels like our planet is bursting at the seams with humans, but fertility rates are actually falling. Dr. Jennifer Schuber is one of the world's leading authorities on demographic trends and the implications population rising and falling has on politics, economics and even relationships. She explains why the future of work, migration and peace depends on the paths we take from here when she joins me on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan from 1pm tomorrow on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Scattered showers, especially afternoons and evening. Possible thunderstorms and hail with localised downpours in Northland and northern Auckland today. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, periods of rain. Heavy falls in Gisborne from this evening, easing tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, also weighted upper. Cloudy periods with occasional drizzle about the ranges. Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Isolated showers, mainly about the ranges. Rain spreading north tomorrow. Heavy falls possible in Fiordland and southern Westland. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Fine spells. Areas of morning and evening cloud. Isolated showers for inland Marlborough and Otago this afternoon. Scattered rain developing in Southland and Otago tomorrow afternoon. Then a few spots spreading to Canterbury. And Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. Rain developing tomorrow afternoon. The time is coming up to 8 minutes past 6. I will have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. If today's protests over the new government's policies on co-governance and the treaty are anything to go by, next year's Waitangi Day commemorations could be a heated affair. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon says he intends to visit Waitangi on the 6th of February, as does ex David Seymour. Ko take manuhiri anai nei, ko Pita Tipini. Pita is the chair of the Waitangi National Trust Board and joins me now. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe.
Who is on the invite list in terms of politicians for next year, February 6th?
There's no invite list per se. Just like any home, when visitors turn up, you welcome them. So certainly the doors of the Waitangi National Trust are open for all and sundry to come along, and that's at the best of times. But given that it is the Waitangi Day commemorations period, it's really important that the Treaty of Waitangi is the focus, and therefore the treaty partners should front up and have a conversation.
So would you be disappointed if all parties in government were not represented on that day in Waitangi?
I'd be really disappointed, but I wouldn't be surprised because it's happened before where either governments or political parties have chosen not to front up at Waitangi.
And what kind of a reception do you think they could expect?
I think given what's happened today and what's been on the boil over the last couple of weeks, is that the Māori people, well, not just the Māori people, are getting very angry and very frustrated over what's being mooted in government over the treaty principles and what it represents. Clearly, the Māori people see it as an attack on the Treaty of Waitangi and the constitutional basis of this country.
How do you see it?
The way I see it is that we at the Waitangi National Trust want a safe and secure environment for the treaty partners to have a very considered and pointed discussion and debate on what it means, because we have to frame this up in a way that sheds more light on the situation and less heat. So we want people to be cool and collected and having that debate. And I must say, David Seymour has always been open to fronting up and having a debate face-to-face. Last year, he turned up and spoke in Te Reo Māori, which I thought was a significant achievement on his part. Maybe the messages weren't that well received by all, but in him giving a go at speaking Te Reo Māori, I thought it was significant.
He wants a review of the treaty, and his preference would be to have a referendum on it, in his view, to ensure the same rights and duties for everyone. Is that reasonable?
Well, I think it is reasonable. I think it's a good thing that all New Zealanders have a discussion and debate on what the Treaty of Waitangi actually means, because I think the majority of New Zealanders don't know what it is, nor do they know what it means. So anything that's going to shed light on the Treaty of Waitangi, what it meant then, but what it, importantly, what it means now. And let's remember, we're slowly but surely approaching the bicentennial of the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, amongst other key milestones. So we need to have that debate. I just think he's placed it in the wrong place politically, which is
Where
why
has he placed it? Where has he placed it in your view?
Well, he's placing it on a political platform, and he's also saying we need to end division by racism and separatism. So while he's saying let's have the debate, and every New Zealander should have the debate, he's framed it up within racism and separatism, whereas I think we need to have that debate, but through a much more proactive framework.
Has honouring the treaty led to racism and separatism in Aotearoa?
No. The way I certainly view it is that when Governor Hobson stood up on the 6th of February 1840 and said, he iwi tahi tata, he was saying clearly we are two different people but one race. So we need to accept that.
So do we need a referendum or not?
No, we don't. But we certainly need to have a debate. And as I say, we need to frame it up within a much more positive and proactive with an approach like that.
So, arguably, some of the protesters were having some of that debate today, raising their concerns, being seen. But one of our politicians today has said that those protesters, and I'm using his words, are damaging the name of the good Māori whānau who don't want to be involved. Is that what they're doing?
Not at all. I think during the lead up to the elections, there were a whole lot of messages that were increasing division and separatism in our nation. And I think people need to use the right language and frame it up in a positive way.
How would you sum up race relations in this country right now? Are you worried about division?
I'm very worried about it. It's going to challenge this country. When you hear statesmen like Jim Bolger and Chris Finlayson who say we can do without this, coming through government, we've got much bigger things to be focusing on right now. If the politicians now are not listening to those statesmen from the recent past, then you've got to ask what the rationale is for why they're trying to ram this through.
What about taking away te reo names from government organisations?
Personally, I think it's absolutely stupid. This country, and the point was made this morning on the various marches, is that there have been some hard-won achievements over the recent years, and those are being eroded in no time, and it's taking this country backwards. So, looking ahead to Waitangi, all I can say is that we want to create an environment where we can have a safe and well-considered discussion and debate.
At Waitangi in previous years, it's been an opportunity for politicians to be told that they will be held to account for the promises they make and the things they say. Now, the new Prime Minister has said that Māori have, quote, done exceptionally well under previous national governments, and he says that his government will improve outcomes for Māori. How will you measure that?
I will measure it by the progress that we make within amongst the Māori people, including health statistics, education statistics, and more importantly, and I don't think it's misaligned with what the National Party is all about, which is what I call mana motu hake, or self-reliance and independence as people work on solutions that suit themselves. So if that can be achieved, and I think the national government has done it in the past, then that's a good sign.
Kia ora rā, we really appreciate your time. That is Peter Tipene, who is the chair of the Waitangi National Trust Board. Moving onwards, a family from the far north has travelled to Rarotonga as they fight to preserve their language and learn more about their ancestors. Ngā Tamariki Manihira is a music performance group. They homeschool their children who speak fluent te reo Māori. Lydia Lewis caught up with them while they were in Rarotonga.
Steeped in Māori culture, these Kiwi kids, Ngā Tamariki Manihira, are proud of their language.
Ko tōku ao he ao manua nui, he ao tāhua, nōku te whiwhinga nui, ko taku kōrero ki ngā tamariki anō, ngā tamariki Māori, kia kaha tonu, kia ako i te reo Māori kia tika, kia ora tonu ai mō ngā uri whakaheke kei te heke mai.
At 12 years old, Tūmanako Manihira looked me in the eye and told me speaking reo Māori is a privilege, it's empowering and it's beautiful.
Ko te ao Māori kei runga, ko te reo Māori kei runga, o tira ko te ao, ko te ara o ngā uri whakaheke kei runga.
He says maintaining our culture and our language will help build a brighter future for generations to come. Tūmanako is one of the lead singers in Ngā Tamariki Manihira, who have been retracing the waves made by their waka, or waka, which made the journey to Aotearoa from the Cook Islands. According to tradition, te mataatua, otherwise known as mataatua canoe, made landfall in Aotearoa over 800 years ago. Mauke historian Tino Kura Auru Taire says te mataatua was built in Mauke.
Now, you people pronounce it over here at mataatua. What is the meaning of that? When my tupuna named that waka for Taratoa Ariki, he said, the eyes of God above will look after you as you travel the ocean. That's the reason why I call it te mataatua, the eye of God.
A history vital to provide the missing pieces not only to Avaiki Nui or Cook Island Māori, but Avaiki Tātou or New Zealand Māori like Raiha Manihira.
We found out some amazing things that we also came from Atu, which is the Nauru Island, Mauke as well.
Raiha Manihira is the Pautoko Manawa or CEO of Te Whānau Manihira.
Our kaupapa is about sharing our reo and sharing our culture, and so we wanted to come here and do a bit of a cultural exchange and share some of what we've done in Aotearoa and learn how we used to live on Rarotonga. And it's beautiful to see the connection that we have, the similarities, and also the evolution of our culture.
Raiha Manihira says while the children enjoy singing, swimming with the turtles and eating nu or coconuts, for the adults, this time has been somewhat of a rebirth.
We wanted our kids to live in a world where they felt comfortable with who they were, and so we fought hard for it and we worked hard for it.
A world that she has not always felt lifted her up.
Ka tae mātou, ka tae tātou. If we can do it, we can all do it. We've been there, we've been in the same boat as you where we didn't feel Māori enough, we didn't feel enough to be able to learn our own culture. We felt like we were lesser because we weren't connected to our marae or our people. But just know that you are capable, you are strong enough to do it, and you don't have to be anything else in order to be Māori.
A journey now reflected in the children. 8-year-old Ngā Roimata Manihira says her connection to her language and now her ancestors' story is her superpower. It means everything to her. It's my world, she said. Does your reo give you strength?
Ai tātu mea koina te tihi o taku manawa, te ao, koina te ao o taku manawa no reira. Ko toku mihi ki o whakike, nā rātou I whakaako mai ia mātou.
And 4-year-old Te Ata Mahina jumped in on our interview. Adding she had something to say. Not prompted by the adults either. Hikina te Manuka, a call from the pepe of the group, Te Atamahina, take the challenge, move forward and pave the way for your descendants.
And we head to Christchurch now, where another protest against the new government's policies on co-governance and the treaty is underway. Our reporter Neva Chittick is there. Kia ora, Neva, what's going on?
Kia ora, Lisa. It's a very lively atmosphere here. You might be able to hear in the background there are people singing waiata, they're banging drums, there's a guitar going, and every so often the crowd gets racked up and conch horns start blaring out. There are many flags here, Tino Rangatiratanga ones. There are also the odd Tongan flag around as well. And people generally seem to be in quite a good mood. There are lots of signs saying Toitu Te Reo, and there's about 500 people here getting ready to march through to Victoria Square.
How would you describe the mood?
Very upbeat. Everyone's quite unified. There's been a lot of waiata. A few minutes ago, the crowd performed Pahu Pōtiki, a haka, and there was a lot of just good nature. Everyone's smiling, looking out for each other, and in general it just seems to be quite uplifting. There's sort of a sense here that everyone's unified in what they want.
And is it clear what they want? What is the message?
Almost everyone I've talked to said the exact same thing. We're here for our mokopuna, we're here for our tamariki, we're here for the generations that come after us. We want to keep speaking te reo. We want to keep our children being able to learn te reo, and we don't want our culture to go anywhere. It's everyone's here wanting to protect culture. One said quite explicitly, we want the policies that are in place now to stay. They do not want the changes that the government has proposed.
Thank you, Neva. That is Neva Chittick, our reporter there in Christchurch. 22 minutes after 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. As the Gaza Strip continues to be devastated by Israeli bombs, the occupied West Bank has also seen a steep rise of violence in the last few weeks, and the clashes between Israeli settlers and Palestinians are becoming increasingly destructive. The BBC's international editor, Jeremy Bowen, has been in the area south of Hebron, where an entire village has been destroyed. He filed this report.
Palestinian farmers are using the donkey because of their neighbours, aggressive Jewish settlers who they say will steal or break their tractor if they use it. Arabs and Jews started fighting over every grain of soil in a land both sides believe should be theirs more than a century ago. In the West Bank, it still comes down to that in every rocky field. In Susia, in the South Hebron Hills, Palestinians live under constant pressure from Jewish settlers. But it's been much worse since the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October. The settlers were watching. One of their leaders cancelled an interview with us at short notice. Palestinians fear another 1948, when their society was destroyed by Israel's independence, which Arabs call the catastrophe, the Nakba.
We've been passing through one Nakba to another through the Palestinian occupation years. We cannot handle another one. We don't have any place to go. This is our land, this is our property. We need to stand here in this land.
Soldiers came to check what we were doing. One told an Israeli colleague that he was a traitor for visiting Palestinians. They filmed us, but took much less interest in what had happened a few miles down the road. The village of Kirbet Zanuta had been bulldozed, activists said last night. Zanuta's 200 Palestinians left 4 weeks ago after a barrage of threats from armed Jewish settlers. The school was destroyed. Britain helped fund it. The project was called Supporting Palestinians at Risk of Forcible Transfer. Activists said settlers did it to make sure the Palestinians would never come back. Someone drew Jewish stars of David. We went there with a former Israeli Special Forces soldier who now campaigns against the occupation.
They are demolishing Palestinian villages, beating up Palestinian farmers, stealing their olives. They are trying to open a third front, an east front, against the Palestinians. Why? The Palestinian West Bank. Why? Because they want this without any Palestinians. They want the land without Palestinians.
Palestinians see all this and the rest of the settler violence on the West Bank as confirmation of their worst fears, that there are powerful elements inside Israel, in the government as well as the settler movement, who want them out and who are using the enormous crisis surrounding the Gaza war as an opportunity to further their agenda. Zanuta's Palestinians have petitioned Israel's Supreme Court and hope to return. It is going to be much harder now.
To Indonesia now, where rescue teams are still trying to find 12 missing hikers who were on an active volcano when it erupted over the weekend. 11 bodies have so far been found on Mount Merapi in Sumatra. The tragedy is being seen as a warning to other trekkers. Here's more from the ABC's Bill Birtles.
In an extraordinary video filmed on the volcanic mountain, a young woman completely covered in ash records a selfie telling her mother, "This is what I look like now." In a separate video, a woman struggling to breathe talks into the camera. She managed to send it out, but local officials say she later died. For family members of the remaining missing climbers on Mount Merapi, it's a nerve-wracking wait, as rain mixed with ash continued to fall over the 2,900-metre tall mountain. Rescue crews managed to bring some injured survivors to safety, but the continual eruption has stalled their ability to go further up the mountain to look for more survivors or to recover bodies. Dr. Hendra Gunawan is the chief of Indonesia's Volcanology Centre.
We tend to underestimate the mountain and assume it won't erupt, even though the statistics show it could happen any day.
The volcano is not quite as famous as Mount Merapi in Java, but it nonetheless is the most active one in Sumatra and attracts thousands of trekkers each year. That's despite a ban that's been in place for more than a decade, forbidding people from going within 3 kilometres of the crater. But enforcement is lax. And volcanology chief Hendra Gunawan says trekkers have long been ignoring the ban.
From what we understand, the fatalities have all occurred within the top section of the mountain, within a kilometre or so of the crater. Our recommendation for visitors has long been to avoid the 3 kilometre buffer zone. But too many people actually want to go into the danger zone.
Around 70 people were hiking on Mount Merapi on Sunday when it erupted. Volcanologist from the University of Queensland, Dr. Teresa Ubide, says it shouldn't have come as a surprise to anyone.
Volcanic eruption in Indonesia is expected, and in this particular volcano, this is an active volcano that was erupting earlier in 2023. So it is expected and common.
And she says it's a reminder to hikers everywhere about the risks.
We need to be aware that active volcanoes are active and they can erupt. This is a horror story, and we need to know that as much as the emergency management and the volcano monitoring agencies do their best, it's not a straightforward thing to do, and there are certain risks.
Search crews will continue to look for the missing hikers on Tuesday if the flow of volcanic ash rising from Mount Merapi eases.
All right, it's almost time for us to head off now, but got some very important feedback that I feel we need to share with you. This is on Jimmy Allingham's report on the Christmas grotto. A listener has got in touch and rightfully says Allingham should be taken to the Broadcasting Standards Authority for not doing the Martin Woman's Christmas dance. Yep, that's the gingerbread dance. We'll see if we can coax it out of him before Christmas. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything, you can check out Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up is Poolside with the legendary swim coach Mark Bone talking about the significance of the Commonwealth Games as a pathway for young Kiwi athletes. And kaua e wariwari te Aotearoa e a mātou kōrero. Don't forget to check out our videos online. Have a great night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. ACT Party leader and Government Minister David Seymour has dismissed today's nationwide protests against coalition Māori policies, saying they disrupted lots of people for no point. Meanwhile, hundreds of protesters are gathered at Christchurch's Bridge of Remembrance. They're opposed to axing the Māori Health Authority and reviewing co-governance. The widow of one of the 51 Christchurch terror attack victims has told the inquest that she had to ask then Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern for help to find out